Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, and welcome to another weekend book review. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. All right, so are you ready to dive into history, but not the way you learned it in school? You wanted the whole shebang of human history, but with a twist. And you sent us the perfect source for that. The World According to Cunk. It's history, but presented as a fake documentary, packed with deadpan humor and really unexpected observation.
It's fascinating how this source, uses comedy, but it also manages to highlight some pretty serious historical truths. It's like if you held up a funhouse mirror to the past, you get a distorted image. But sometimes you also see these hidden features that you might not have noticed otherwise.
Exactly. So that's our mission here, to extract those nuggets of historical wisdom from all the comedic chaos of Cunk. And we'll be exploring all those big events, the people and those trends that really shape the world, all while kind of channeling Cunk's playful spirit. Who knows, maybe we'll even gain a fresh perspective on some of those familiar textbook stories. Ready to start at the very beginning, the dawn of humanity.
Absolutely. Cunk, she kicks things off with her take on cavemen. She calls them, wait for it, posh bears. Obsessed with survival.
Posh bears. I mean, it's funny, but it also makes you think, what was life really like for those early humans? Was it all just about surviving, or were there moments of, maybe, dare I say, culture?
Well, survival was the main thing back then. Yeah, but Cunk's joke about Stonehenge, how she says people didn't invent time for another 10,000 years, actually hints at something pretty remarkable. Think about it. Those massive stone structures, they weren't just random piles of rocks, right?
Yeah.
They were most likely used for astronomical observation, for trying to figure out the cycles of the sun and the stars. So that suggests, a certain level of intellectual curiosity, something beyond just basic survival.
So they were the original stargazers. That's amazing. And what about those cave paintings she mentions all the time? Mostly animals, and they're painted using, animal products.
Yeah, the irony is not lost on Cunk. But, beyond the humor, those paintings provide a glimpse into the minds of our ancestors. Imagine, trying to understand the world without written language. These images were their way of communicating, of sharing stories and beliefs. It's like the first social media, but with a lot more ochre and mammoth blood.
Oh, I never thought about it that way before. Okay, let's move on from posh bears and onto a slightly more advanced bunch, the ancient Sumerians. Cunk gives them credit for some pretty big inventions. The wheel, writing, and wait for it, money.
She's definitely onto something there. She jokes about the value of money being determined by powerful magic, but she stumbles upon a concept that really revolutionized human civilization. Think about it. The ability to exchange goods and services using a standardized system, that's the foundation of everything. Economies, empires, everything.
It's crazy how much impact the Sumerians had. Now, how about we head over to a civilization that was known for their, shall we say, unique approach to the whole afterlife thing. Cunk's take on ancient Egypt is, colorful is one way to put it.
Oh yeah, she really loves to poke fun at their obsession with death, the pyramids, and hieroglyphics. And let's not forget her hilarious mispronunciation of the Valley of the Kings, as the Valley of the Kings.
Classic Cunk. But behind the jokes, there's a pretty profound truth. The ancient Egyptians, they had this really complex belief system, and it was centered on the afterlife, all those elaborate rituals, mummification, and those massive tombs. It reflects a culture that's wrestling with some really big questions about life, death, and what comes after.
Exactly. And speaking of cultures that wrestled with the big questions, Cunk's transition to ancient Greece is just pure gold. She points out, how they invented so many things that we still use today. Triangles, sports, democracy.
Seriously, that's her big takeaway.
Well, that's Cunk for you. Always got to find the absurd angle. But she, acknowledging, the incredible legacy of ancient Greece, their innovations in philosophy, art, politics, it shaped Western civilization in some pretty profound ways.
She's right about democracy, though, right? It's a concept that's, it was imperfect back then in its early Athenian form, but it's had this lasting impact on the world.
It definitely has. It was a radical departure from the monarchies of the time. Just imagine it. Ordinary citizens having a say in how they're governed. Of course, it wasn't perfect. Women, slaves, foreigners, they were all excluded. But the core principles, citizen participation, debate, rule of law, they've really echoed through the centuries.
And then, of course, you've got her take on Greek art. She says it's filthy and you could see everything, always keeping it classy, that Cunk. But it does make you think about, how artistic expression has evolved over time, from those symbolic cave paintings to the human form, like rendered in all its glory by the Greeks. It's a fascinating journey.
It really is. And speaking of journeys, our next stop takes us to the realm of philosophy. Cunk's description of Socrates, his famous quotes, his provocative ideas, and then, of course, his death from drinking poison. It's tragic, but also hilarious.
Socrates, the original intellectual rebel.
Yeah.
But his story, it raises some timeless questions, like what happens when an individual challenges the status quo? What price do we pay for speaking truth to power?
Those are some profound questions, for sure. And Socrates' legacy as a thinker, his emphasis on critical thinking, self-examination, that continues to inspire us today. And his method of questioning the Socratic method, it's still used in classrooms, courtrooms all around the world.
From thought-provoking philosophy to world-conquering ambition, Cunk next summarizes Alexander the Great. She really highlights his vast empire and his, surprisingly early death.
Yeah, Alexander's story is a reminder that even the most brilliant and ambitious figures, they're still subject to the whims of fate. He conquered these vast territories in such a short span of time, and he spread Greek culture and ideas wherever he went. But he died so young, only 33, and it makes you wonder, what more could he have achieved if he had lived longer?
It's one of history's big what-ifs, for sure. And speaking of history's pivotal figures, Cunk's quip about Julius Caesar being a Republican, oh, that's classic Cunk.
She does love to play with words. But, Caesar's time, it was a period of immense change in Rome. The Republic was crumbling, it was giving way to the rise of an empire. And Caesar himself was a complex figure, a brilliant general, a shrewd politician, and ultimately a victim of assassination. His story really captures the drama, the intrigue, the violence that often came with those transitions of power.
From the rise and fall of empires to the spread of a new faith, Cunk then tackles the rise of Christianity. And her take on Jesus, well, let's just say she was the phrase, went viral.
I think she might be onto something with that analogy. Christianity's spread throughout the Roman Empire was remarkably fast. From a small group of followers to a major force within a few centuries.
It's a story of faith, persecution, and then ultimately triumph. But it also raises some really fascinating questions about how ideas, beliefs, and even religions, how they spread and how they evolve over time.
Absolutely. And speaking of evolution, shall we move on to an era that's often misunderstood and even sometimes maligned? Cunk's description of the Middle Ages as a time of mud, parsnips, and wonky-eyed art. Well, it's certainly amusing.
And also a little unfair, don't you think? The so-called Dark Ages, they had their share of advancements, their share of achievements, despite all the upheaval that came after the fall of Rome.
You're absolutely right. And Cunk's mention of King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, well, yeah, it's steeped in myth and legend. It taps into something really profound, the enduring power of storytelling. Those tales of chivalry, heroism, and romance, they've captivated imaginations for centuries.
They're stories that really transcend time and place. And speaking of things that transcend time, Cunk's description of castles as very big houses with tops that look a bit like proper pies with eggs in, well, that's uniquely Cunk, that's for sure.
Only she could find a culinary comparison for medieval architecture. But those castles, they weren't just for show. They were symbols of power, control, and defense. In a world where violence and instability were just the norm. Think about the Norman conquest in 1066, which Cunk describes, with her usual flair. Those castles the Normans built, they played a key role in consolidating their power and transforming English society.
It's fascinating how architecture can reflect the political and social dynamics of an era. Okay, ready to leave the mud and parsnips behind, ready to enter a period of rebirth and rediscovery.
Let's step into the Renaissance. Cunk, she highlights the invention of the printing press, the rediscovery of those classical Greek ideas, and the return to realistic art. She even says, quote, everyone remembered how to draw properly.
I love how she manages to simplify these complex historical trends. She turns them into these bite-sized, humorous observations. But she's right, about the transformative impact of the Renaissance. The printing press, for example. It democratized knowledge in a way that's hard to even overstate. Suddenly, ideas could spread much more rapidly, and they could challenge traditional authority and fuel new discoveries.
It really was a revolution.
Yeah.
And the rediscovery of classical art and literature, It led to a flourishing of creativity and innovation. Think about, the works of Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. They were pushing the boundaries of artistic expression. They captured the human form with this unprecedented realism.
And of course, no discussion of Renaissance art would be complete without mentioning, the Mona Lisa. And Cunk, well, as always, she has her own unique take. She jokes that it, quote, doesn't look like a Lisa. Looks more like a Barbara or a Glennie's.
Only Cunk would challenge the norms of art history like that. But you know what? Her quip reminds us that even the most iconic works of art are still open to interpretation, to debate, and even a bit of humorous skepticism. I mean, the enduring fascination with the Mona Lisa, those crowds that it draws, the endless analyses, it's a testament to the power of art to transcend time and culture.
Speaking of transcending boundaries, let's set sail for the age of exploration. Cunk gives us a summary of Columbus's voyages, and she emphasizes, his mistaken belief that he'd reached India and the huge impact of his discoveries.
Columbus's voyages, they mark a pivotal moment in world history. They opened up the Americas to European exploration, and that led to a massive exchange of goods, ideas, and people. Cunk, of course, she focuses on the more amusing aspects, like how Columbus thought he'd found a new shopping destination.
But the consequences of those voyages, they were far more complex and far-reaching than just, a shopping spree. The Columbian Exchange, that's what it's called, it brought all these new crops and resources to Europe, but it also had this devastating impact on indigenous populations. Diseases just ravaged entire communities, and the legacy of colonialism that continues to shape, global power dynamics to this day.
It's a reminder that history is rarely a simple story of just progress and discovery. It's often a much more complex tapestry of, triumphs, tragedies, and unintended consequences.
And speaking of complex consequences, let's move on to a period that really shook the foundations of Christianity, the Reformation. Cunk's description of Martin Luther nailing his 95 Theses to a church door, it captures the drama of that moment for sure.
It was a bold act of defiance. It was a challenge to the authority of the Catholic Church, and that sparked a religious revolution. Cunk's, comedic simplification, it sort of belies the profound impact of the Reformation. I mean, it led to a split in Christianity, fueled wars and persecution, and ultimately reshaped the religious and political landscape of Europe.
It's amazing how a single act of protest can spark this far-reaching chain of events.
It is. And speaking of individuals who challenge the status quo, Cunk next highlights Sir Francis Drake, a skilled navigator and privateer who played a key role in challenging Spanish dominance at sea. His circumnavigation of the globe was a testament to human daring and ingenuity.
And let's not forget his knack for piracy. Drake's exploits on the high seas, they were this blend of exploration, conquest, and good old-fashioned treasure hunting. It's a reminder that the age of exploration wasn't just about making maps and scientific discovery, it was also about power, wealth, and competition between nations.
Absolutely. And speaking of competition and intrigue, Cunk's account of the gunpowder plot, with Guy Fawkes trying to blow up Parliament, that takes us into the realm of political conspiracy.
It's like a story that has all the elements of a thriller. Secret plots, hidden explosives, and a narrow escape from disaster. But beyond the drama, it reflects the deep religious tensions simmering in England at the time. The struggle for power between Catholics and Protestants, that was a defining feature of that era.
Exactly. And speaking of struggles for power, Cunk next takes us to a period where scientific discoveries challenged traditional authority and sparked a revolution in thought. The scientific revolution.
She kicks things off with a rather amusing take on Galileo's astronomical observations and his conflict with the church, the whole telescope, Earth revolving around the sun thing.
Cunk, of course, makes light of it. But Galileo's discoveries, they were groundbreaking. They challenged that prevailing geocentric view of the universe, and that put him at odds with the Catholic Church, which, was holding fast to the idea that the Earth was the center of everything.
It's fascinating how scientific advancements often clash with these established beliefs and power structures. And speaking of scientific advancements, Cunk's portrayal of Isaac Newton discovering gravity thanks to an apple falling on his head is, it's classic Cunk.
Yeah, it's a simplified story, maybe even apocryphal.
Yeah.
But it captures the essence of Newton's genius.
Yeah.
His laws of motion and universal gravitation, they revolutionized our understanding of physics. And they laid the foundation for modern science. It's a reminder that sometimes those most profound discoveries come from observing the seemingly mundane.
From falling apples to profound philosophical insights, Cunk next briefly touches on Descartes and his famous quote, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am.
Descartes. He was a key figure in the Enlightenment. It was a period that emphasized reason, logic, and individual thought. His philosophy challenged traditional authority and really paved the way for a new era of scientific inquiry and intellectual freedom.
It's amazing how these seemingly like disparate historical threads, from cave paintings to the invention of money to the rise of Christianity, they're all connected.
They really are. And Cunk's, comedic approach, while it's definitely unconventional, it helps us see those connections in a new light. It's like she's weaving a tapestry of history, with each colorful thread representing, a different event, figure, or idea.
It's a tapestry that's full of surprises, twists, and turns. And as we continue our exploration of history, it'll be fascinating to see what other unexpected connections and insights we uncover.
I can't wait. So where do we go next on this Cunk-inspired journey?
Well, buckle up, because we're about to enter an era of unprecedented technological innovation and social upheaval, the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era. But first, let's take a quick break just to let all this historical knowledge sink in. We'll be right back with more from The World According to Cunk.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into history with Philomena Cunk as our unconventional guide.
That's right. Last time we were about to enter, the Industrial Revolution and the Victorian era, and I'm sure Cunk will, won't hold back when describing those smoky factories and, those really buttoned-up Victorians.
Oh, absolutely not. Oh. But before we get to the top hats and steam engines,
yeah,
we need to rewind a bit and revisit that other defining feature of the 20th century, the Cold War. Cunk, she describes it as like annoying and persistent, like a cold you just can't shake.
It's a funny analogy and, not entirely inaccurate, but that cold, it had the potential to turn into like a full-blown nuclear winter. The stakes were unbelievably high with the U.S. and Soviet Union locked in this ideological struggle. Both of them armed with enough firepower to destroy the world, like many times over.
And yet, amidst all of that tension, there was also this incredible display of like scientific and technological prowess. The space race. Cunk, of course, she highlights the Russians' early lead with Sputnik, that little metal sphere that really sent shockwaves to the West.
It's easy to forget now, but Sputnik was a total game changer. It wasn't just about launching a satellite into orbit. It was about proving technological superiority, on this global stage. And it spurred the U.S. to pour resources into their own space program, and that led to the moon landing, a truly remarkable feat of human ingenuity.
Speaking of remarkable feats, Cunk, she also mentions Laika, the dog who became the first living creature to orbit Earth. Of course, she tells the story with her, usual deadpan delivery, but there's also this tragic element to it. Laika's mission, while groundbreaking, also highlighted, the ethical complexities of early space exploration.
It's a reminder that progress often comes at a cost. But speaking of progress, let's shift gears from the vastness of space to those, cozy living rooms of 1950s America. Cunk describes this era as a time of shiny cars, perfect families, and music that made your parents want to wash your mouth out with soap.
Oh, the birth of rock and roll. Cunk, she captures that generational clash perfectly. But, beyond the rebellious teenagers and, the scandalized parents, rock and roll represented this profound cultural shift. It was a new sound, a new energy. It was a reflection of, the changing social landscape. And then, just as things seemed to be settling into this new normal, the world held its breath as the U.S. and Soviet Union, they faced off in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Cunk mentions it, of course, in her own way, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was a terrifyingly close call. For a few tense days, the world really teetered on the brink of nuclear war. It's a stark reminder of how fragile peace can be, even, in the midst of so-called progress.
And speaking of fragile peace, Cunk's next stop takes us to a decade that challenged conventions, embraced new ideas, and faced its share of tragedies, the 1960s. She touches upon the counterculture movement, the Vietnam War, and the assassination of JFK, all with her trademark blend of, humor and observation.
It was a decade of profound change, wouldn't you say? From the fight for civil rights to the anti-war protests to the explosion of artistic expression. The 1960s challenged social norms and pushed for progress on, multiple fronts.
Absolutely. And while Cunk might joke about hippies and tie-dye, the counterculture movement, it had a lasting impact on society. It challenged traditional authority, questioned materialism, and embraced, ideals of peace, love, and personal liberation. And of course, no discussion of the 1960s would be complete without mentioning the Vietnam War, a conflict that, divided the nation and left these deep scars.
Cunk even throws in a reference to the moon landings, suggesting that some people believe they were faked.
Ah, yes. The moon landing conspiracy theories. They're a fascinating example of how, history can be reinterpreted and debated and even distorted over time. But you know what? The fact remains. Landing humans on the moon. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to human ingenuity and scientific collaboration.
Okay. From the moon to the mosh pit. Cunk's whirlwind tour of history next takes us to the late 20th century, and she highlights the rise of punk, the internet, and globalization.
Punk rock, with its raw energy and anti-establishment message, it was a reaction to the perceived complacency and conformity of the times. It was a cultural earthquake that shook things up and paved the way for these new forms of musical expression. And then, of course, you have the internet.
Cunk, she makes a joke about it being a way to waste time looking at pictures of cats. But the internet's impact has been profound. It's transformed communication, commerce, and culture in ways we're still, grappling with. It's connected people across borders, democratized information, and given rise to these new forms of social interaction.
It's also created new challenges, of course.
Yeah.
From cyberbullying to misinformation to, the erosion of privacy. But there's no denying its transformative power. And then you have globalization, which Cunk describes as everyone realizing they could buy cheaper stuff from other countries.
Haha. She does have a knack for simplifying those complex concepts. Globalization, it's led to this increased interconnectedness, trade and cultural exchange. It's brought benefits to many. But it's also exacerbated inequality. And it's raised concerns about environmental sustainability. It's a complex phenomenon with both positive and negative consequences.
And speaking of complex phenomena, Cunk's journey through history takes us to, a defining moment in recent times, 9/11.
It's hard to believe it's been over 2 decades since those horrific attacks. Cunk, in her own way, acknowledges the profound impact, that they had on the world. They led to the war on terror, these heightened security measures, and a real shift in global politics.
The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which Cunk, mentions briefly, they were direct consequences of 9/11. These conflicts, they were complex and controversial, raising questions about, the use of military force, the role of the U.S. in the world, and the challenges of nation building. They also had this profound impact on the lives of so many individuals, both, in the countries involved and beyond.
From war to the, ever-evolving digital landscape, Cunk next highlights the rise of social media and smartphones and how they've changed the way we communicate. She jokes about people being, glued to their screens, but there's a deeper truth to her observation.
Social media, it's connected people in these new ways, created online communities, and given a voice to those who might otherwise be marginalized. But it's also led to echo chambers, fueled polarization, and raised concerns about privacy and the spread of misinformation.
It's a double-edged sword for sure. And speaking of double-edged swords, Cunk's take on billionaires and their space ambitions is just classic. She calls them bored, rich white men with no friends going on their dream holiday.
Ouch. But her joke does raise some valid questions. Space tourism, it's a growing industry. But is it a responsible use of resources in a world facing so many challenges, like, climate change and poverty?
It's a debate that's only going to get more intense as space travel, becomes more accessible. And speaking of debates, Cunk's next stop takes us to post-communist Russia. And she talks about Yeltsin, Putin, and the ongoing war in Ukraine.
Russia's transition from communism to capitalism, well, it's been turbulent to say the least. Putin's authoritarian rule has led to these crackdowns on dissent, aggression towards neighboring countries, and a resurgence of Cold War tensions. The war in Ukraine is a tragic example of this, with devastating consequences for both countries.
It's a reminder that history, it's not this linear progression towards peace and progress. There are always setbacks, conflicts, and challenges to overcome. And as we navigate the complexities of the 21st century, it's so important to remember the lessons of the past, both the triumphs and the tragedies.
Absolutely. Cunk's, whirlwind tour through history, while it's humorous and unconventional, it ultimately reminds us that the past isn't something static or settled. It's this living, breathing entity that continues to shape, our present and our future.
And speaking of the future, Cunk wraps up her history by reflecting on the challenges of, writing a history book in the digital age, especially when so much is happening so quickly.
She's right. The pace of change is accelerating. And it can be overwhelming to try to make sense of it all. But maybe that are the challenge and the opportunity of being alive in this moment. We're witnessing history unfold in real time, and we have a responsibility to engage with it thoughtfully, critically, and with a healthy dose of humor.
Well said. So there you have it. a Cunktastic journey through time, from the dawn of humanity to the digital age. But before we sign off, let's leave our listener with a final thought-provoking question. Something to ponder as they continue their own explorations of history.
Here's one. If, as Cunk suggests, humanity's greatest achievement is a multifunction printer, what does that say about us?
A multifunction printer. Seriously. Out of everything. Art, science, exploration, Cunk thinks that's like the pinnacle of human achievement. Okay, it's funny, but also kind of, depressing.
Right. Yeah, that's funny. But maybe there's a deeper meaning to Cunk's observation. Like maybe she's saying that our obsession with, convenience, efficiency has overshadowed our pursuit of, grander, more meaningful goals. Have we become so focused on, multitasking and optimizing that we've lost sight of what it means to really create,
to explore, to connect with something bigger than ourselves?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about. I love my gadgets, but I also, get a thrill out of discovering a new author or visiting like a historical site or even just having, a deep conversation with a friend. Those are the experiences that really enrich our lives, don't you think?
Absolutely. And maybe that's the real takeaway from our deep dive into the world according to Cunk. She reminds us that history isn't just, dates and facts. It's a reflection of the human experience in all its, messy, hilarious, and ultimately, profound complexity. It's a story that's always being written, and we're all a part of it. And whether we're, building pyramids, inventing smartphones, or just trying to figure out how to use that darn multifunction printer, it's our capacity for curiosity, creativity, and connection that really, that makes us human.
Well said. So to our listener, as you continue your own, exploration of history, remember to approach it with a critical eye, a sense of wonder, and a healthy dose of humor. After all, Cunk has shown us that even the most serious subjects, they can be illuminated by a well-placed joke.
And who knows, maybe you'll be the one to, discover the next great historical insight or invent something even more amazing than a multifunction printer.
Now, that would be something worth celebrating. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into history. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep laughing. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for more captivating deep dives like this one. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.